On day 3, the Falcons picked up right where they left off, drafting defensive lineman, this time defensive tackle Brandon Dorlus out of the University of Oregon, who is a 3-time All Pac-12 player. This is another pick that was universally loved. And listen, if you're talking about the Falcons defensive line and the thing that we said they must address, yes, they didn't do it in the first round, but they went out and they got 3 guys, 2 guys that were very, very high-level college players, and one that was a high-level college player but has athletic measurables that are tests off the charts. Hopefully, the hope, I think, is that at least 2 of these guys make a pretty significant impact. And this is a place where you look at round 3 last year with Zach Harrison, they were able to find a pass rusher. Hopefully, Trice, Arroyo, or Dorlus, 2 of those guys, maybe all 3 of those guys make an impact. But this is another one that was universally loved among Falcons fans.
Yeah, and I think with Dorlus, and more so Dorlus and Arroyo, where the Falcons clearly have a type in terms of the defensive linemen they're looking at, guys who can move up and down the line of scrimmage. Both of those guys are, what you would consider 3-4 defensive ends, bigger guys who can thrive on the interior and exterior. So I love the stacking of defenders. Like I said, there's more than one way to skin a cat. Pressuring the quarterback doesn't have to come from the traditional edge spots from guys like Von Miller and Micah Parsons and things like that. You can create pressure from the interior via a committee approach, so to speak. You don't need that one guy who's putting up 15 sacks per season. And I love this. Just stacking talent in the trenches is never, ever a bad thing in the NFL. Particularly pass rushers. All these guys kind of have that high upside, whether they can rush from the interior or, kind of bolster and anchor the edge. I love both of them. And I remember watching Dorlus, and I don't remember which game exactly it was. I think it was the Washington game, believe it or not. And all Joe Klatt could talk about was how impressed he was with this guy. And he was rushing from over the center, over the tackle, up and down. He thrived in Dan Lanning's defense. I can't say I know a ton about him, but I remember hearing his name a lot throughout the season. And if that's what you're doing as a Falcons GM and, this new regime in terms of stacking defensive talent, particularly in the trenches, I'll never be mad, ever.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's going to be mad if they go out there every single draft for the next 4 years and draft 3 defensive linemen in rounds 2, 3, and 4. I think everyone will be very happy with it because it has been the biggest issue. We've kept asking them to do stuff like this. Yep. So as much as we can complain about the Michael Penix trade or maybe trading up for a row when you liked someone else or preferred someone else, they at least went out there and attacked it in rounds 2 through 4. We'll have to see how these guys pan out. But you got to at least give them credit for their conviction in trying to fix that area in the middle rounds of this draft. They go and get linebacker J.D. Bertrand out of Bertrand, I don't know, out of the University of Notre Dame, who Mel Kiper immediately went on there and compared him to Zach Thomas. Now, if J.D. Bertrand, that's literally what he went, a Hall of Fame linebacker, which is funny. But the reason he said it was because of his preparation, and he mentioned how Zach Thomas was taken in the 5th round. So listen, if he ends up being Zach Thomas, we can all sit here and say the Falcons they had a hell of a draft, because getting a guy like that in the 5th round pretty much makes a lot of draft classes. I mean, if you can get one Hall of Famer in a draft, you can pretty much consider that, especially in the 5th round, a success. But this is a guy, a linebacker. He's going to immediately probably contribute on special teams. Linebacker is not an area of need for this team. I mean, maybe with the 3-4, but you look at those middle linebackers, Nate Landman, Troy Anderson, and Caden Ellis. You got a pretty damn good group. Hopefully he can add to that. But Marcus Freeman raved about this guy, his preparation. He was never out of position, very smart football player. When you're talking about a 5th round pick, you're not really trying to address needs. You're trying to find literally someone that contribute in some form or fashion. And I think they got that guy in round 5.
Yeah, and I saw Raheem Morris kind of describe him as a 4-down player. Typically, when you talk about linebackers or, defenders in general, they're either 2-down or 3-down players. Like Troy Anderson is the quintessential 3-down player where he's athletic enough to kind of drop into coverage. And you kind of saw Nate Landman's weaknesses, and the reason why he was really an undrafted free agent kind of exposed last year. Though he was incredible on the first 2 downs, he struggled in coverage at times. And I do think that, to push back a little, it was a sneaky need. Again, we didn't draft a starting cornerback, huge red flag, but also, that 4th linebacker could potentially be a big spot. And Raheem Morris described him as a 4-down player. He can defend the run. He can drop back into coverage in terms of those sub packages, and he's going to contribute on special teams like Chase mentioned. So when you're talking about, like you said, day 3 picks, obviously you could shoot for the stars and hope you find the next Grady Jarrett who becomes a perennial Pro Bowler type guy. Or you could go for the low floor or the high floor guys like this, who are going to contribute on special teams at the very least. I would say that should be seen as a successful day 3 pick.
Mackie Wingo was on the board, and I mean, we were sitting there, and I was like, you know what?
I know
we drafted 3 defensive linemen. Go draft him again. Like, I don't care. Four. I know he went in the 6th round. I don't know how he fell. We end up in the 6th round taking Jason McClellan, another running back. Now, obviously, running back, we have Algier and Robinson. Nothing's going to change with the status of those 2 guys. We did kind of need a 3rd running back. But I will say this about Jason McClellan. I mean, I watched every single Alabama football game. I love Jason McClellan. I thought he was a very, very good running back. I don't know how much run he's going to get being that 3rd guy, but you could do a lot worse than finding a 3rd running back, a guy that you know can protect the football. He can be a productive person in the receiving game, and he's a very good running back. I think in the 6th round, you're talking about guys who can actually make impacts later in this draft. Running back's a position that you can find all throughout the draft. I think Jason McClellan could step in if you needed him to and be just a perfectly fine running back, and now he's your 3rd guy.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's a couple positions where you should take one every single year no matter what, and running back is one of them. You shouldn't do it in the top 10 typically, but this Falcons team is anything but typical. So I think, instead of – this is just my process. Obviously, Bijan Robinson is going to have a different path. You should draft a running back on day 3 every single year and then never pay him, because the shelf life of an NFL running back is incredibly short. It's very rare that a second contract works out for the team. It might work out for the players. I mean, look at all the examples. Todd Gurley. I think the only recent example where it had worked out for both sides is Derrick Henry
and
McCaffrey. But those aren't typical. Like, Derrick Henry is not he is atypical of this running back, era. He was made in football laboratory. The guy's a freak. He's a defensive lineman running the football. That's not typical of what it's going to be. And Bijan Robinson could be,
more McCaffrey.
But also, taking running back on day 3 is never going to be a bad thing. Chances are you're not going to re-sign Tyler Algier. Maybe you do, but Chase McClellan is easily able to contribute in year 1 immediately.
And I think the biggest question of this entire draft was the fact, and you brought this up just a few moments ago, is that they didn't take a cornerback. Now, what the Falcons do at cornerback this year, I don't know if they have a free agent signing in the future or something like that. There were tons of cornerbacks available right there, especially when they moved up to pick 35. And you're talking about Cooper DeJean, Kool-Aid McKinstry that just went right after the Falcons selection. Maybe that's something they end up regretting. I typically like to say it's kind of crazy how teams always seem to overlook certain players, especially when you get to that round 2. I mean, you're talking about the Derrick Henrys types. It's like that guy was, like you said, made in a football lab. How is he picked 52nd overall? Like, it doesn't really make much sense. And it seems like the good teams like the Eagles and Ravens, who consistently draft well, they just take these players that land in their laps. And you look at Quinyon Mitchell going to 22 to the Eagles, and then following it up with Cooper DeJean going 36 or 37, I believe, to the Eagles, or 40th, whatever it was. It just seems like good teams just kind of make the obvious decisions. And that's where I think a lot of the disconnect between the Falcons is, like, there's obvious decisions right in front of you, and you continually take the player that, maybe has this flaw, but the upside's really, really there. And when you're doing it that early in the draft and mistakes keep happening, you're like, why do we keep doing this? I think that's where the disconnect with the Falcons fans remains.
Yeah, and there's always going to be a free agency period after the draft. Plenty of, I wouldn't say high profile, but like noteworthy free agents wait till after the draft to go and find a team, whatever their priorities are, maybe competing, maybe I want playing time, that could be a thing, or city, whatever their criteria is, they're waiting to see what is met after the NFL draft. And the Falcons were always going to, it felt like, have to dip back into free agency, whether it was a corner, whether it was an edge rusher, maybe, a different position, like maybe like that 4th linebacker. And it was cornerback, and the Falcons have to add. There's no question about it. Raheem Morris or Terry Fontenot, I don't remember which one, addressed it. They said that they wanted to get one,
which is just Quinyon Mitchell,
which is just a weird thing to end up and be like, in hindsight, we were really trying out. Well, you didn't, you didn't. And the cornerback market isn't robust with a ton of options. You got Stephon Gilmore. He's probably the top guy. Whether he wants to come to Atlanta, I don't know. Xavier Howard's dealt with injuries. I'll tell you this right now. As it stands today, the cornerback room is in desperate need of a starting caliber player. Mike Hughes, Clark Phillips, and D. Alford are a good trio to kind of fight out that last starting position and then also be your two guys off the bench immediately. That's what they are. Two of those three guys cannot be starting week in and week out. Let me just paint you the picture of A.J. Terrell going down. And now you've got D. Alford, Mike Hughes, and Clark Phillips starting on all three cornerback positions. That is a nightmare. That's an absolute nightmare and cannot happen.
Yeah, I mean, and I'd say, listen, Raheem Morris is a defensive coach. He obviously has a lot of confidence in his defensive ability, and Jimmy Lake and all that. We've yet to see it, really. I mean, we did see it before when he was the defense coordinator of the team, but he's going to have to make lemonade out of oranges here, because frankly, there's a lot of things missing. They could still use another starting caliber pass rusher, but we're going to talk a little bit about that first round pick coming up after the break, and Michael Penix.